Let's look further now at the functions available to us using Ample Bass. Just for variety, I've switched over to the ABP version, modelled on a precision bass. We've already seen how to use key switches to utilise a different articulation. You'll remember that this is driven by this section here. Obviously, you can play your bass lines live and use your left hand to operate the key switches where necessary. Here we've got the sustain articulation controlled by the key switch C0. However, if I flick over to C#0, then we're going to get a natural harmonic. D0 gives us a palm muted sound. As you can see, I'm using the virtual keyboard, but of course with a hooked up MIDI keyboard, you'll be playing this live and using your left hand to activate those key switches to change over the articulations. Alternatively, you can record your bass line into a DAW, such as Cubase, and then manually add in relevant articulations by positionally including appropriate key switches where necessary. Incidentally, if you want to retune a string, maybe use a drop tone on the E string so that it plays back at D when in the open position, well, you can do that by adjusting the tuning pegs. With our E string here, for example, rolling over the tuning peg, clicking and dragging down now detunes the string so that an open string plays at D1. And therefore, if I want to play E by clicking on the E key here on the virtual keyboard, as a consequence of retuning down, of course, I have to play F sharp on the E string, the 2nd fret there. I'll just take it back. Do notice also this option. It's set to standard mode at present. This is the play mode switch, and it allows you to play into Ample Bass and sound like a real bass player in terms of how individual notes play back. In fact, there's some further information there when you roll over it with this pop-up. For example, if you flick it over to keyboard mode, multiple notes can be played on each string simultaneously. Now this is obviously something that can't be done on a real bass, but it might be just the effect that you're looking for. If set to solo mode, only one note now can exist at any one time. And as I say, further pop-up information assists you. I'll revert back to standard. At the far right, you'll see this peak meter that displays the playback volume of your notes. So, dependent on the velocity used, of course this is going to register appropriately. Incidentally, using the virtual keyboard here, the lower down the key you are, then the louder the actual note will sound. Clicking a note at the top plays back the note softer and of course with less volume, and you'll see the volume registering on the peak meter. For those times when you don't want notes to sound with a clear, biting, immediate transient attack, there's a fade-in dial here that allows you to soften the attack time. Now I've found that dialing in a small amount produces a softer plucked sound, redolent of a gently played, quieter bass, or even approaching a fretless sound. This is it set to 0, so there is no fade-in. Okay, we get that sharp attack sound. But if I dial it up ever so slightly to 0.2, as we would expect, we get that sort of faded-in, violining type of sound. As I say, redolent of a fretless bass. I'll dial it up to 1, and this will blunt our attack, making the fade-in take that little bit longer. Okay, now that's unrealistic to my ears, but of course that's one of the things that you can do. You can experiment with Ample Bass P, or J, whichever one you use. They use exactly the same engine, it's only the samples that change. But adapting your fade-in, as you can hear, allows you to experiment and get exactly the right sort of sound that you want. I'll return it to its natural state of 0. Now next to it is an autobuzz rotary dial and connected on-off switch. Bass players know that there's a certain buzz produced when new strings rattle on frets. Although not exactly designed to mimic that, I found it does a good job of emulating it. You need to be aware though that the notes will be randomly buzzed depending on frequency. So with it switched on and set at 10%, this is what it sounds like. You can probably detect a very discreet buzzing. I'll dial it up to 90% now. Okay, much more pronounced there. I'll dial it back down to 20%. Now similar to that function to the right is this auto accentuation noise dial and its related on-off switch for randomly applying noise to sustain articulation, and once more this depends on the frequency. I'll activate it And this is what it's like set at 10%. And then once more at 100%. So as you can hear, quite a dramatic difference. I'm going to dial it down to 20%. Although as you've just heard, even at this setting, in combination with autobuzz, and something we're going to look at in a moment, the fret sound, we still do get quite a bit of rattle there. And this does make it sound very real, although to my ears I'd prefer it to be more subtle. But of course I can play around with these dials to suit my preference. Now I've just mentioned fret sound. Any guitar stringed instrument, be it 6-string acoustic or electric, or even bass guitar, as we are looking at here, well of course they require a hand moving across and around the fretboard. Owing to this, it's inevitable that characteristic fret noise occurs. Ironically, studio engineers battle to banish those squeaks, but as they do, the naturalness of the instrument diminishes. So to help make A, B, J and P sound even more realistic and not to be sanitized, Amplesound has incorporated these two sliders here, FSA and FSR. You will need to make sure it's activated by using the on switch here. So with these two sliders, FSA and FSR, you can adjust the fret sound attack and release volume. As you can see, you can increase or decrease the fret sound attack and release here to add in enough realism to the performance. Now a moment ago I talked about my preference. If you want to open up some presets, come up to Settings, and now in the resulting pop-up where it says Load, click. Consequently, you'll be presented with all these different presets that you can use. Alternatively, you can create your own. I'll choose the top option, All Notes Buzzed, and open it. Let's have a listen to what this preset sounds like. Okay, so as the preset implies, quite a buzzy sound, and to my ears very much like we've just restrung the guitar. And because we've chosen a preset, we don't need to mess around or change any of these other dials or sliders. It's all done for us. Let's try another one. I'll go for this one down here, Rich Noise. Okay, perfect if you like a rich noise sound. Now I'm going to go back to the default setting and finish off for this second tutorial of 3 by looking at this dial, the start dial. As you can see at the moment it's set to 40 milliseconds, and once you roll over the dial, you'll see this pop-up informing you exactly why this is the case. When you are playing Ample Bass live with a MIDI keyboard, as we are informed here, it takes around 50 milliseconds to get the string vibrating, and therefore Ample Bass preserves the moment of the stroke, and our start time is set to 40 milliseconds, so that within our DAW, in my case it will be Cubase, we would set the track delay to -10 milliseconds. However, if you've already recorded your lines, then you would set your delay time in your DAW to -50 milliseconds. Okay then, so I'll finish up here, and we'll further look at Ample Bass in the third of our 3 tutorials.